Coming up in the Hey Friend podcast.
You can put so little effort in when you text and then get instant gratification. I can connect with 15 people with no effort, and it feels so good to just extend the feelers and get a positive response. I would rather have that than a conversation most of the time.
When I pray, sometimes I can't even turn that volume down without even having anything turned on.
What do you believe your identity is in?
It's so true.
Where does your value come from as a human being? Like if you're a follower of Jesus, man, your value does not come from your productivity. It does not come from the number of people you have. It does not come from the amount of engagement you get on your social media stuff.
What it's up, friends. Thanks for listening to the Hey Friend podcast. We're so happy to have you here today. In Fargo, North Dakota, it's super warm. Not super warm. It's warm.
It's warm for North Dakota.
Yeah.
After wintertime, I think it's like 60-something degrees.
It's not bad.
I know my friends down in like the southern U.S. are like 60. That's like winter temperatures for us. That's
a little windy out there. I wanted to work from outside today, but that didn't happen. But
my kids put on shorts and T-shirts, and we're out jumping on the trampoline. And my son was outside for a while wearing a T-shirt and pants. And he came back and said, "Dad, I'm hot. I'm sweating," and wanted to put on shorts. So that's how we live in North Dakota.
There we go. A lot of people be like, "Where's your coats? Where are your coats?" If you're not from North Dakota, but This is beautiful weather.
It is.
All right, Ben. What are we talking about today?
Yeah, we got stuff to talk about. Specifically, we're going to talk about talking about things. I'll make a couple observations on this and then ask a question. So I've noticed, and we've maybe mentioned this in previous episodes, that there is a significant trend of people not having real conversation in their life. One observation of this, this is a couple months ago. I returned from I think a 4 or 5 day trip. A friend picked me up from the airport. I asked them how their week was, had some back and forth conversation, just kind of catching up. It was late at night, so it wasn't going to be a super deep conversation or anything. But this friend, literally, I realized this as I was getting out of their car, literally asked me 0 questions about how my trip was. Didn't even say kind of the stuff that'd be like typical, like, "Hey, how was the trip? How'd travel go?" or anything like that. 0 questions like that. No offense taken on my part about that, but it was an interesting observation because as I realized that, I was like, man, that's actually something I see a lot in people younger than me. This friend is about 10, 12 years younger than me. Yeah, it's something I see a lot where people are less apt to engage in conversation. I'll read one quote here from a book that I'll probably read from it again in a little bit. It's a great book by Sherry Turkle. She's a sociologist, psychologist, kind of studies the intersection of how does technology shape culture and individual life. So this is a quote from her book, Reclaiming Conversation. It's actually a quote that she has from 2 quotes specifically from 2 young adults, students that she was interviewing about technology and conversation. The title of the chapter that these quotes are like the intro to is on friendship, so appropriate for the Hey Friend podcast. So she read, this is from a 15-year-old boy. It says, "With my friends, it's either no conversation or conversation about what's going on my phone."
That's so true.
Then from a 21-year-old woman, and this book was written several years ago, "You can put so little effort in when you text and then get instant gratification. I can connect with 15 people with no effort, and it feels so good to just extend the feelers and get a positive response. I would rather have that than a conversation most of the time." So that's what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about how do you have real conversations with your friends, because it seems like, in my experience, and I'd be curious to hear if it's similar to you, there's fewer and fewer. It's less and less natural to have real conversations. What you agree, disagree?
I would agree with that. I think it's just, I would call it awkward to have a real conversation with someone.
Yeah.
We have attached that to having real conversation, that the labels can be awkward. The labels can be like, there's fear there. It's like, I don't know what to say.
Yeah.
I don't know how to respond to this person. There's so much about us and what we're comfortable with, and we forget that, or we forget about the whole conversation in the midst of having the conversation,
totally.
and it doesn't become real, and it's a surface level side of it, and so yeah.
So when was the last time that you had like a conversation with a friend where you walked away being like, man, that was really like, that was a meaningful conversation? And I felt like encouraged. You walked away from a conversation and be like, wow, that was good.
yesterday, actually.
Nice.
One friend called me up and we were just catching up. And again, it's a season of my life that does a lot of things changing. And we kind of talked through that a little bit. And he was just so kind of encouraging of just like, hey, and it was deep, but it was also just like there's this peaceful side of it. Like, oh, everything's going to be okay. Hey,
So not a hard conversation.
not a hard conversation, but a hard conversation. I mean, man, we at the Monday nights with the guys, there's times that we are bringing things to light, and those can be hard conversations too. Things that we are struggling with, or things that we are navigating, or things that we're being challenged with. Those are the hard conversation. I feel like every time I've had a real conversation, it's been hard because it's been heavy conversations,
Sure.
But that doesn't mean that's not the only way to have a real conversation.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be like a heavy thing necessarily.
Yeah. I think we attach that. That's easy for us to attach. Oh, we're going to have a real conversation with someone. It's going to be heavy.
Depth equals difficulty or something.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah. So
thinking of the conversation you had with your friend just yesterday, what were some of the things in that made you like, you said it was on the phone, so hang up the phone and be like, man, that was a good conversation.
It was more of just like, hey, you don't have to have, I'm someone that likes to vision. I'm someone that like, I want to do all these things. Here's how I'm going to do it. And he reminded me of like, slow down. Let's go one thing at a time. And let's just focus on this thing. Because if you go a million miles an hour, what's going to happen is you're going to come crashing down a million miles an hour. Yeah. So just a small reminder of like, just like slow down. And at the same time, sometimes when someone tells you something that you don't want to hear, he also is like, he's like, this is pretty cool. Encouraging at the same time. So that was a real conversation. It's like, we just let each other in a little bit and ask how he was doing. And we talked about his marriage and things like that. So that was a real conversation. It was like, it wasn't like, well, how's your day going? How's work going?
Yeah.
Things like, it was more like, how are you? And how are you from a perspective like, not like
for real.
Yeah, for like, how are you? How are you doing, man? And so that was really cool.
So I'll see if I can summarize a couple of the things I'm hearing you say. One, you guys you went beyond surface level. You were asking those questions of, man, how are you really doing? Like, what's really going on in your life? Tell me about it. Don't just give me the surface level answer. It sounded like there was also some pushing a little bit, like, hey, you should maybe think differently about this thing, or you should do this thing differently, but not in a way of like, you're failing. It's just, hey, this is some counsel from me as a friend, someone who knows you. And there was mutual like back and forth interest in each other. And obviously it sounded like he initiated the call and was doing that with the intention of like, hey, I want to hear how life is really going. Yeah. That makes me think, in preparing for this episode, I was scrolling through Proverbs because there's a whole bunch of Proverbs. And man, what a modern statement, scrolling through Proverbs. I was actually reading it on my physical Bible, but I'm so used to looking at stuff on the internet. I said scrolling. But there's this fantastic Proverbs 27:9, and I actually noted it down, which what you were saying made me think of this. It says, oil and perfume make the heart glad, but the sweetness of a friend comes from his earnest counsel. And that sounds like what that's a good description of what he's like. I'm earnestly counseling you. I want to see this thing go well for you, and I'm going to give you some counsel as a result. Not forcing stuff on you, but I'm going to tell you what I think.
It wasn't like planned. It all happened. Just someone was just checking on me and how I was doing, and it just all happened. And but I think time came with that too. It's like we didn't have those kind of conversation right away in our friendship. So
you've known each other for a while.
And I think do you think in the beginning of having a real conversation with someone at the first time with them in the first time, is that
like, is it possible?
It is possible, but what does that real conversation look like?
Like content-wise?
Content-wise,
or like how's it going to work?
Is it hard? Is it?
I think that can depend a lot. So my work doing some of the chaplaincy stuff I do, oftentimes the goal is in the first couple interactions. We don't force it or anything, but the goal is to have relatively deep conversations. And there's been multiple times where I've come and met someone for the very first time, and boom, we're right into it. Oftentimes that's because they're in a moment of crisis of some sort. So they're like, man, this is an issue that I need someone to help me solve. And so they're going to open up because they feel the pressure of that. But oftentimes, and that's a slightly different dynamic, because that's like a job, and I'm in a position where they know that like my role is to be someone they can talk to. But in just general friendship, acquaintances, meeting someone, I think it probably would be a similar dynamic where if someone's in a moment of crisis, you can often jump into a deeper level of conversation, versus the typical flow is probably going to have multiple surface level conversations to kind of feel out, like, is this someone who's safe for me to open up about deeper things with? And over time, you're going to develop deeper conversations.
Yeah, even at some point. So when we should open up, we don't, because we're not comfortable with doing it, even if it's safe. That, I'm saying it from that perspective, even if it's safe. How do we know it's safe?
Yeah. Well, this is just, before I answer that question directly, I think this makes me think of one of the things I was reminded of as I was skimming back through Sherry Turkle's book that I quoted from earlier. She talks about the fact that a key piece of being able to have real conversations is also having solitude in your life, the ability to shut off, disconnect from input or distraction, and actually do some reflection and be attentive to what's going on in my heart. What am I feeling? What am I thinking? Because if we're constantly in a state of distraction or entertainment, you don't have time to develop that depth of an inner life out of which you can have deep conversations with the people around you. So I think that's probably one of the barriers for some people, and I would say a lot of people. I see it myself even. It's like, man, it's so easy for me to get in a mode of like every moment I'm driving. I love learning stuff. There's so many podcasts out there. I love, like, it could be, if I wasn't intentional about this, every time I get in the car, I could put headphones in or plug the Bluetooth in, and like off I go listening to a podcast, which is helpful at times. But if there's not space, this is something I've been trying to be more intentional with, is like I want to have about half my drive time be nothing on, and just use that time to reflect or pray or whatever. And that's been really good.
Yeah, that's so true. Even for me, in times of like, it's so easy to put on a podcast, like you said. It's so easy to listen to music. It's so easy to read a book. It's so easy to, even when I go on walks, to put my headphones on and listen to something, whatever that is. And even when I pray, sometimes I can't even turn that volume down without even having anything turned on. So it's telling me something of like, man, like, am I scared of my own thoughts? Am I scared of, just like being still? What is that? So I had to work in my life. There's a couple of times in my life that I had to work through that. And I was like, all right, I was really intentional of like, hey, I'm going to not listen to anything at this time. When I'm going to go to the gym and put no headphones on, I'm going to go on a walk, or even the car thing of, I'm not going to listen to any music, things like that. And it's really helped just being quiet,
Totally.
But I think some of us don't want to deal with our thoughts.
Yeah. So, and then I'm sure there's some of y'all who are listening to this who are like, that's not me. I'm the opposite end of the spectrum, where all my thoughts are all the time. And I probably need to take more time to distract myself from my thoughts. Either way, though, I think you need that space to process things on a personal level. But also, I think Turkle points to this in her book as well, that one of the biggest distractions and things that prevent deep conversation is just purely having your phone in your pocket, on the table, whatever. I'll read this. This is a quote, one of the things I jotted down in our notes here, because I was like, oh man, this is so kind of wild. So she says, studies show the mere presence of a phone on the table, even a phone that's turned off, changes what people talk about. If we think we might be interrupted, we keep conversations light on topics of little controversy or consequence, and conversation with phones on the landscape block empathic connection. If two people are speaking and there's a phone on a nearby desk, each feels less connected to each other than when there is no phone present. And she goes on to mention that, I think this is a pretty stunning statistics, over the last 20 years, there's been a 40% decline in the markers for empathy among college students, with the most notable amount of that decline being in the last 10 years. And she's writing this, I believe it's 2015 or 2017. So that's only increased since then. So just purely having something, a device there that's going to distract you, causes you to have less real conversations. So man, if you want to be able to have real conversation with your friends, leave the phones in the other room.
Leave the phones in your car.
Yeah, leave the phone in your car or whatever.
So are we saying because of lack of focus there?
Yeah, I'd say part of it's lack of focus. I 100% agree, both in my own experience and just observation of other people, that when you have the phone there, you're partially distracted. You get the notification. I even noticed this with my kids and my parenting, all that kind of stuff. And just, so I've started doing for about a half hour at least after I finish work, I just leave my phone in my home office, that sounds fancy. It's also my bedroom. So I'm like working like 2 feet from my wife and I's bed. But I leave my phone there for at least a half hour as a way of being like, no, I want to focus fully on my family and on my kids. And I think we need to practice that same thing with our friends. Rather than if you're at the coffee shop meeting up with some friends or wherever you're at, instead of taking your phone out and putting it on the table, like put it in your backpack or put it in your purse or shut it off or whatever, like get it out of the line of sight. Better yet, leave it in the car.
Yeah. I mean, what I'm hearing, 3 things that could be blocking of us having a real conversation with our friends is, one, again, I said already, lack of focus.
Yeah.
Lack of knowledge and lack of time.
Yeah, that's a big one that we haven't really. I think that the time piece is a big one because if our schedules are so full that we don't have space to slow down and actually listen, that's not a good thing. Like, you're not going to be able to go deep quickly. It can happen sometimes, but that's going to be the exception to the rule. You need time to be able to get into a real conversation.
And even from just that topic of like having our schedule being full all the time, we feel like if our schedule's full, we're being productive.
Yeah.
And sometimes that can be the opposite, of not being productive, right? And I feel like that we do that to ourselves of, man, again, it comes from the side of like, I want to be noticed, that I'm busy all the time. I'm doing all these
If I'm
cool
busy,
things.
I must be valuable.
Yeah. And that's not true. That's a lie. And certain aspects, again, we want to be effective, not just busy people. And it's important for us to really be still, even with our time, you know. You don't have to go do that one thing. You don't have to go read this. There's certain, if you commit to doing something, do those things, but we just want to add on so we feel, like you said.
Yeah, that's a big one. Scheduling, I think those 2 things, like removing, because part of the draw to these technology, like your phone, tablet, all that kind of stuff, when you're with someone, is that it feels like you're being more productive. Like, oh man, I can be in this conversation and I can respond to these texts. I'm multiplying my time by doing multiple things at once. When in reality, what you're doing, you're actually removing the value from the current time that you have by trying to double it.
And I've done this so many times. Oh, I have this meeting at this time. I have this meeting at this time. I'm going to go to this next meeting. And as I was talking to this person, I thought about I was thinking about my next meeting, because my schedule is so full. So I think, we need to make space and we need to give ourselves time to be present in what's in front of us with our friendships or with our families or with our work, whatever that looks like.
Yeah.
Time doing a lot doesn't mean you're more important, you know? So,
and all of these things, I think all of them kind of tie back into the question of, what do you believe your identity is in?
It's so true.
Where does your value come from as a human being? Like, if you're a follower of Jesus, man, your value does not come from your productivity. It does not come from the number of people you have. It does not come from the amount of engagement you get on your social media stuff. We're saying this as we're posting this stuff on social media and hoping that y'all are benefiting from this and it's getting engagement. But the reality is the value doesn't come from that. The value comes from your connection with God the Father. Your value comes from your connection with the people around you. And that's the stuff that's actually going to like fill your soul and give you purpose and hope and joy. And when we're disconnecting ourselves from real conversations and not making space for those things, we're actually disconnecting ourselves from like losing who we truly are by trying to become something else.
There's this thing about the American gospel. It's, I don't know if I've said this before, and I've been seeing this more and more recently on social media of, wow, it's Jesus and this, Jesus and my family, Jesus and I'm a pastor, Jesus and I'm a worship leader, Jesus, and instead of just being Jesus, we feel like, I think we talked about this recently. It's like we want to do so much for God's kingdom, but it doesn't flow from Jesus. It flows from our own.
Yeah, it's a need to perform or
Absolutely.
something like that.
Yeah, and we do that to ourselves all the time. I'm guilty of it too. That's something that the Lord's been working through me. It's like, no, I don't have to. All I need, and the Lord's going to work through me. It's a heart problem, more than anything. It's a heart problem, right? And we were just recently talking about this, and we don't have to do all these things. It's been done.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and often the things that are most impactful, just another plug for the value of real deep conversations. Think back on the things that changed your life, the things that had impact in your life. Probably central to those things was a real conversation. It was someone sitting you down and saying, "Hey, you need to think about this," or someone who made an observation or comment about, "Wow, you were really good at that." And those are the things that shape and change the trajectory of people's lives. And if we're eliminating from our experience in day-to-day life most of those real conversations, we're probably eliminating a lot of our and other people's opportunities for growth.
Yeah.
So let's do this. We got just a few minutes left before we want to wrap up this episode. What are some practical tips we can give people for doing some real conversation?
Schedule it. Make some space.
Yeah. I mean, that's slightly frustrating to have to say that. But I think that the reality is we live in a world, in a culture that is highly scheduled, particularly if you're an adult. If you got a full-time job, there's lots of other stuff demanding our time. There's not, the ideal, I was just talking with some friends about this last night. If you're in college, you have more flexibility than you do if you're kind of a young adult, post-college stage of life. But there is nothing wrong about scheduling it. Ideally, it would just happen where you have, oh man, we're just hanging out. We crossed paths and wow, we just had this great conversation because we had a free time and we sat down and just caught up. That might happen, but I think the reality is most of the time you need to schedule it.
Yeah. Ask good questions. Some of it could be the past. How have they been doing? How are they dealing with what's happened in the past? Present. What are they doing now? And where are they at now with their career, with their spirit, their soul? How are they doing? And the future too. It's like, I think we should dream too. It's like, man, what is the Lord asking you to do?
Hey, asking people those kind of dreaming questions can be really helpful in starting. This is something I'll do often in conversations with people in the chaplaincy world is like, okay, I'm walking around a workplace talking with them about their jobs. And some people you can pick up, or they'll tell you like, I don't really like this job. I want a different job. And often I'll ask, so if you could create a job for yourself, like what would your ideal job be? And plenty of people are like, I don't know. I've never even thought about that.
Yeah.
So man, if you can help people dream big, like that's a great conversation starter because that's going to tell you so much about what they're passionate about, what they love.
They can geek out a little bit.
Totally. Yeah. Like I had one guy who answered, this was the best answer I've gotten to this question. Totally. It's like I think he's like this guy's 6'8", kind of middle-aged white guy who grew up in North Dakota. I asked him, what would your ideal job be? And he said, I would love to be a sushi chef. I was like, what? Like, that is not the answer I was expecting. But then we went on to have this great conversation about, because my wife and I love sushi. My wife worked at a sushi restaurant for a while. We had this great, probably like 15-minute conversation about why sushi is delicious and like the beauty and intentionality that goes into the process, particularly in Japan, of making sushi. It was like, dang, man, like,
let's go.
That's cool.
Let's go. I think life can be a lot sometimes, right? And sometimes saying a kind word to someone, and just encouraging them, and just really saying something to them that can lift them up and build them up.
Yeah.
And sometimes it comes from nowhere, right? And those opportunities are just like ending with something with gratitude with this person that you're speaking to, or this friend that's in front of you.
Yeah.
And just say some things that you're grateful for them. Say things that, hey, man, thank you for being one of my closest friends. Thank you for speaking into my life. Thank you for always just being there. And I truly appreciate you. And it's amazing to see how the Lord's using you. Like, say something.
Yeah, or call out things that you think they're good at. And be like, wow, dude, you're really good at making sushi or whatever. That's something that I think is highly underutilized. At least here in the Midwest where we're located. The tendency is, like you were saying earlier, deep conversation is going to be a heavy conversation.
Yep.
When you could actually have a really good deep conversation about, man, here's how much I value you as a friend, and here's why.
Yeah.
Because that's not something that people hear most days. I have one friend in particular who's really good at that, and I love spending time with him. So if you want people to want to spend more time with you, tell them what you like about them frequently, and they're going to want to spend more time with you. Guaranteed.
I love that. Earlier I asked, quick, if you can answer this quick. Safe. I think that's important. How do you, with conversations, if you know that you want to go deep with this person, and how do you know it's safe to go deep? How would you answer that quickly?
Yeah, that's a hard. It's harder to answer. I think. How do you know towards the other person versus how do you know for yourself? But I'll give you a couple thoughts off the top of my head. I think one, are they someone who expresses genuine interest in you? And then two, are they someone who reveals genuine truth about themselves?
Yeah.
Like, are they willing to open up? If they're not, I'd feel like there needs to be a reciprocation.
Vulnerability is important.
Yes. Yeah. And it doesn't have to be like some radical mind blowing thing of like, wow, I killed someone when I was 4 or whatever. Like, I don't know, hopefully that doesn't come up in conversations that you're having. But the willingness to open up and be honest, I think would be a big marker for me. Like, if they're willing to do that, that's probably a sign to me that it's a safe space to open up. And oftentimes, I think the reality is sometimes we just have to take that risk and say, I don't know how this is going to go, but I want to have a real conversation with this person. So I'm going to be open and honest about something about me.
Yeah. You don't have to be afraid to move forward. Yeah. Your ultimate friend is Jesus. He's the one that lets you in and never lets you down, right? As Tim Keller says. So move forward and just don't let your what you prefer stop you from having real conversation with someone that you can have meaningful relationships with.
Yeah. So go out there and have a real conversation.
All right. My friend, go first today. We love you, and we'll see you next week. Peace. Hey, friend. Thanks for listening. We're all about equipping you to pursue real friendships. You were not created to be alone, because life is just better with real friends. Let's get started.